Okay. Sign on the wall says we're live. And I believe so, although it looks like a few things are still thinking and cycling. All right, we're up and running. All right, this is SYMF Yeshua Messianic Fellowship. My name's Gene Keener, and we are continuing in our study on the book of Galatians. We'll be in chapter 3. This will be our fifth segment of chapter 3, so this is Galatians 3e. And this is, again, SYMF Yeshua Messianic Fellowship. You can reach us on our website, SYMCHATYESHUA.org, SYMCHATYeshua.org. We have materials you can download and look around on the website. We have also a Facebook page, SYMF Yeshua. I think that's it. That's just the name, SYMF Yeshua. Again, try that again. SYMCHATYESHUA. If you like what you see, go ahead and like and subscribe the channel. Tell hang out here. We're here every Wednesday at 6 o'clock California time, and at this point. So give us a listen. We do have the chat window open, so if you want to type in a hello, give us your name, where you're from if you want. Just to give me an idea who's here and who's not. Who's here, I can celebrate that you're here, and if you're not, well, you miss out. That's all there is. If you like what you see, like what you hear, others to join us on Wednesdays at 6 o'clock California time. You can also go on the website if you want to contribute anything to help the congregation or this particular channel. There's a link on our webpage for a donation through PayPal. So that's available to you if you want to do so. It's not a requirement. When we're done with Galatians, maybe we'll start doing a few individual items. Something happened here. It says that something will end shortly unless you restart it in your streaming. Oh, never mind. It's going to keep going. All right. For some reason, I can only see part of the page. Okay. No data. The stream will end shortly. All right, let me see if I can fix that real quick. Okay, this seems like it's moving along. Okay, I don't know enough about this to oops, wrong thing. There we go. Okay, we'll just keep plugging along. I'm going to vamp here for a couple minutes more, just so. Why is this? Okay, that's right. Just so in case anybody wants to straggle on in before we get started. SYMF Yeshua Messianic Fellowship's been together for close to 20 years now. I think 19 years this year. And that's how long we've been doing it. I can't even remember when we got started. And we're located in West Covina, California. We are currently not meeting in our regular location. We rent space at a church in West Covina, but they're kind of closed down, and so we're kind of stuck not being in our usual spot right now. Nonetheless, this is our only real regular scheduled thing. We do get together, but in a very ad hoc, informal process. So this currently is our gathering. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. And we're in Galatians chapter 3. We're going to start our study on verse 19. But let me start at verse 15. We'll take a running start. On our text. Okay, here we go. Brethren, I speak in the manner of men, although it is only a man's covenant, yet if it is confirmed, no one annuls or adds to it. Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He does not say, and to seeds, as of many, but as of one, and to your seed, who is Christ. And this I say, that the law, which was 430 years later, cannot annul the covenant that was confirmed before by God in Christ, that it should make the promise of no effect. For if the inheritance is of the law, it is no longer of promise, but God gave it to Abraham by promise. And there's a little linguistic sleight of hand going on there. It's a drosh, it's a commentary, and adding kind of a new idea or a new look at the use of the singular seed, which was common in the practice. You know, we talk about the descendants of somebody and talk about as their seed, and it's always in the singular, it's not in the plural. So, but here Paul writes specifically that he's extending this to mean the promise is Messiah, and the meaning to that is the promise given to Abraham includes that the nations of the world will be blessed, and thus the argument that Paul is bringing, that you don't need to do anything other than approach God with faith to become part of the family, to belong to the family, to be born again. Okay. Everything else is what follows. Just like God rescued us from Egypt and then gave us his commandments. Salvation comes before instruction. Now, it doesn't mean that salvation is all you need and you don't need instruction, because instruction is the result of your salvation. How you God, how you obey God, how you love God, and the ways you choose to love God are all signs and examples of whether or not you truly do know God and love God. So, keeping the commandments then is not the way to salvation, but rather it is the way to show your love and the way to show your belonging. Okay, I don't know if that's somebody. Someone just said, "Shalom, Barbara." Okay, a study on Psalms 119 and the significance of keeping Torah would be wonderful. Yes, I agree. That would be something good to do. I'll have to put it in my bucket list of things I need to cover before I'm done. That wouldn't be a bad idea though, because as much as I continually harp on the idea that we need to keep the commandments of God, Psalm 119 lays it out perfectly well. And nowhere in the whole Brita Chadashah, in the whole of the New Testament, is there a statement that says we can't do God's commandments or we shouldn't do God's commandments. As a matter of fact, Yeshua said, keep the commandments. So let's do that. Psalm 19 would be a great thing on that. Okay, so verse 19, our text for the day. What purpose then does the law serve? It was added because of transgressions, till the seed should come to whom the promise was made, and it was appointed through angels by the hand of a mediator. Now, a mediator does not mediate for one only, but God is one. Okay, only is in italics, which means it's not for. Does not mediate for one, but God is one. Okay, I'll explain that in a bit. Okay, is the law then against the promises of God? Certainly not. Oh, hold on a second. Let me get my text up here so I know what I'm talking about. Oops, wrong thing. I just pushed the wrong button. Something's going to start popping up here that didn't want to. Okay, I think you're just doing 19 and 20 anyway, so never mind. Okay. I worked this over and updated it last night, and I forgot how many verses we were covering. So that's me. All right. Let's close that out. Don't need that. And done with that, so let's get it out of the way. All right. Now back to our text. Okay, verse 19. What purpose then does the law serve? It was added because of transgressions. The seed should come to whom the promise was made. It was appointed through angels by the hand of a mediator. There's a lot of stuff that's added into this statement that has to do with traditional understanding of what the text says, and a compilation or an addition of other texts in the Bible, which kind of fills out some of the picture. So we'll get into that as we go. Okay, what purpose then does the law serve? Okay. By the way, why are we even messing with this book? Let me back up a little bit, just give a short overview again. I'll do this for every lesson because it's critical that we know the arguments and that we win the arguments. Okay. Paul was writing a letter to the Galatian region, not necessarily any one particular congregation, but within the Galatian region there was a controversy that arose because certain Pharisees came up from Jerusalem claiming that they had authority from James to teach the Gentiles who were believers that they cannot be fully members of the congregation of God. They cannot be one of us, as it were, until they undergo Pharisaic conversion, which includes a circumcision at the end of the whole process. You notice that Galatians focuses a lot on the terminology of circumcision, and that's why. Not the biblical commandment of circumcision, but the Pharisee use of a circumcision for the final act of being converted to become a Pharisee, to become a Jew. Because the last couple things you do is once you're accepted to be part of the community, you go through an immersion, a mikveh, tevilah, if you wish. And when you come up, you go down a Gentile, you come up a Jew. And then you are now a new creation. Well, what happens with a new baby? Okay, 8 days, and within 8 days you're circumcised, or on the 8th day scripturally. But as far as the traditional practice of a conversion, somewhere within the first 8 days, you're to be circumcised, just like a newborn baby boy was circumcised. Okay, that's the circumcision that Paul is arguing about in Galatians. Okay, he's arguing to the Galatians that it's not necessary. He's not arguing against the commandment of God. How do we know he's not arguing against the commandment of God? Okay, again, you need to win this argument. Paul, Shaul in Hebrew, could not be an apostle of Messiah Yeshua, Jesus in English. He could not be an apostle of Messiah if he contradicted Messiah by saying we should not be following the commandments of God. Okay, Yeshua said it all over the place in many different ways that we should be walking in God's commandments. Okay, so for anyone to teach out of Galatians that Paul is saying chuck the commandments is a wrong teaching. Okay, and part of this is we have to learn the arguments, and we have to learn to win the arguments. And one of those is the circumcision that's discussed in Galatians is not the circumcision of the commandment of God, but the circumcision of conversion to Pharisaism. Okay, same thing with modern Orthodox. Okay, this is why it's extremely dangerous for a Messianic to take a conversion with a circumcision, because as Paul argues to the Galatians, that if you make that promise to join as a Pharisee or as an Orthodox, you obligate yourself to fulfill all the rules of Orthodoxy or Pharisaism. Okay, because remember, you keep your word. If you make that oath, you keep your word, which means all the stuff that's not necessary by Scripture, you now obligate yourself that you must do in every detail because you've made that promise. Okay, so Paul's whole argument is to the Galatians, you don't need to convert to anything. You already have everything you need to be fully a part of the family of God. He also writes to was it good? I'm blanking. To the Romans and to the Ephesians, that you are grafted into Israel, even as a Gentile, and even as a Gentile, you are part of the congregation of the people. You are part of the polity, the community of Israel. So understand, as a Gentile, you already have all the status you need to be part of God's family. Okay, that's the argument in Galatians. Now, the secondary argument that comes from this is, if you have everything that you need to be part of the family, why should we bother keeping the commandments? And the answer to that is, if you live in your father's house, okay, whose rules do you follow? Okay, you follow your father's instructions. You follow your father's rules. Okay, so if we live in the family of God and we live in God's household, as it were, we should be following His rules. And in fact, in First John takes the time to explain that your love for God is shown in how you keep the commandments. And our attitude should be that the commandments are not burdensome. That's in First John. Okay? So if he's saying that, we should be saying that. Okay. And let me get down off my soapbox. I'm going to be doing this a lot throughout the entire study because there's so much that's mistaught about Galatians. I'm trying to cover all the bases and all the wrong arguments and how to counter those. So if you do have a question or a comment or a rebuke anywhere along the line, go to the chat window, type in your comment, your suggestion, your question, something you want to disagree with. That's perfectly okay. I don't mind dealing with a disagreement. In fact, that's how iron sharpens iron. So if we have to talk about it, then let's talk about it. Okay. So what purpose then does the law serve? It was added because of transgressions, till the seed should come to whom the promise was made, and it was appointed through angels by the hand of a mediator. Okay. English from Greek New Testament. Why then the law? That sounds like a really Jewish phrase. The transgressions for the sake of it was added, until should have come the seed to whom promise has been made, having ordained through angels in hand a mediators. Okay. English from Greek New Testament. I'm terrible at Greek, so I'm using somebody else's translation. And even though the syntax is very not English, if you don't notice, it's to what little I know, this seems to be one of the most word for word translations out there. So that's what I like to work with. Okay. And then, of course, because the translation, the general translation, I think this is New King James. I'm still not comfortable with it. I did my own attempt at a translation, and that's of what purpose is the law? It was created due to sinfulness, till the seed should come as promised, established through messengers by a mediator. I tried to clean up the language a little bit so it was a little cleaner and more direct. Okay, law in this case, nomos, refers to the written Torah. Okay, and again, this is one of those arguing points you need to be expert at to explain. Paul uses the word law, some version of nomos, in at least 4 different ways through all his writings. Some people say 6. I see 4, but that's a minor discussion. But in the letter to the Galatians, he uses it in 2 basic ways. He uses the word law to talk about God's commandments. In Hebrew, we call that Torah, which is the first 5 books, or Tanakh, which is the entire Hebrew Bible, which we commonly refer to as Old Testament. Lousy name because it's not old, as opposed to New Testament. You don't have an old faded and a new replacement. Rather, you have, you know, the earlier works and the later works. Um, so law is, in this particular case, it's used in the context of the written Torah. And the reason that we specify written is because even by the time of Yeshua and Paul, Shaul, um, there had already arisen the tradition that the uh, man-made commentary and instructions um, concerning the interpretation of God's commandments were referred to as oral Torah compared to written Torah. The oral Torah was, in many ways, even at the time of the Pharisees, was considered superior to the written Torah. And in the cases, and you do have cases where the oral Torah is taken as superior to the written Torah. And this is one of the arguments that Shaul gets into, that what God has written is what counts. Man-made tradition and rules are not that important by comparison. And that's why it's so deadly and so irresponsible to make conversion to Orthodox or to make conversion to Phariseeism at the time of this letter, because you are taking on man's instructions as if they were superior to God's written commandments. Okay, so anyways, why was this given? Because of transgressions. Okay, the Greek there is parabaseon, and there is a translation issue I want to point out to you, the difference between the written Strong's translation and the Blue Letter Bible version online. And it's kind of interesting because the Strong's original 1884 version, 1884 originally, the 38th edition is the book that I have in 1980, translates parabaseon as violation, breaking, transgression. You go to Strong's Concordance and you notice that they've added something. Okay, a going over as a metaphor, a disregarding, a violating of the Mosaic law, the breach of a definite promulgated, ratified law. See here, to create transgressions. That is, that sins might take on the character of transgressions, and thereby the consciousness of sin be intensified and the desire for redemption be aroused. All that is commentary in the Blue Letter Bible version. I bold-faced and underlined to create transgressions because they've added that to the definition of the original Strong's. Okay. The idea, and other commentators that we're going to read, carry on this understanding that the purpose of the law was to create transgressions. And I really have a hard time with that. Other commentators go right along with it, but I just don't see the value of God giving us commandments in order to create transgressions. Okay? The commandments were given to show us what is right and what to do. The purpose of God's commandments is not solely and only to create transgressions for which we could sin against, but rather it is primarily the directions of how to do things correctly. And I think it's really, we do ourselves a disservice by allowing ourselves to think that God gave us the law to make transgressions, to make us guilty on purpose. And the problem with this is that there are there's issues with this, and some of the other commentators pick up on this. So rather than repeat it ahead of their saying, so I'll catch it with their commentary. Okay, and then again, the definitions provided are misleading. See as marked above. One of the previous the last week or the week before, we had another issue of a bad mistranslation. Which doesn't fit the context of what's being said. Okay, let's continue on. The law's function of restraining transgressions would have also made sense to non-Jewish readers. Okay, now restraining transgressions is not a bad explanation. Okay, because God does tell us refrain from doing certain things. Okay, don't do certain things. Um, so that makes sense. But to say to create transgressions, I just goes the wrong way for me. Okay, Torah was given to teach us right and wrong. Torah was and still is the prime way of knowing sinfulness and holiness, and um, that's extremely important to understand. Okay, God gives us the right way to live, and He also tells us not to do the wrong way. Okay, so it's not the sole purpose of the commandments, as some people teach, to create a bar so high that no one can reach it. That really wasn't the purpose. The purpose was to say, do this, don't do that, and you'll have, a close, loving relationship with God. Okay. By the way, why do we have these commandments to do and to not? It's part of our relationship with God. Okay. First off, He likes some things and doesn't like other things. And if we really love somebody, we try to do things that they like and try to avoid things they don't like. So if we love God more than anything else in this world, and we're supposed to, then what He says to do should be the primary thing we should be focusing on. And not doing the things He said not to do is something we should be resisting with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. So, this is the prime way of being, and this is what First John says. We know that we love God because we keep the commandments, and the commandments are not burdensome. Okay, a Tana, which is a commentary or a story taught in the name of Rabbi Meir. Why was the Torah given to Israel? Because they are impetuous and require discipline. Out of the Talmud, Beitzah 25b. Okay. So the people were naturally inclined to rebelliousness. Well, part of that, of course, is after 400 years of living in Egypt, you get kind of used to that lifestyle. And so they're used to it. They're used to all the pagan gods, and they may even like some of it. Okay, then God rescues them from Egypt and says, "Change your ways completely, starting today." Yeah. Okay. So not that God didn't know that it would be hard for them to make changes, but it was a willfulness thing, not a capability thing, but a willfulness thing. In fact, all of our sin is almost never an incapability or an incapacity to be holy, but a lack of desire. We choose to not make God first and what He wants us to do and to be first. And so the sin comes because we choose it, not so much because we can't do anything about it. It's eventually we do choose it. Okay. The point is, till the seed should come. Does Messiah trump Torah? Okay, this is kind of throwing out in the middle of nowhere, because this is where some people argue that Jesus came to die on the cross so we can chuck the Torah. We can throw out the Torah. We can throw out God's commandments. And that's not the case. Okay. So Romans 10:4. Okay. I have it quoted down below. For the goal at which the Torah aims is the Messiah, who offers righteousness to everyone who trusts. Now, if you look in your English translation, because I put that in parentheses with a question mark, is so many times the translation ends up, the end of the law is Christ. Okay. The problem is that's not exactly what the text said. Again, that's another questionable translation, because the word there, telos, which is translated as end, is a better translation to use as goal or target or aim. Okay, so what it really says is the goal of the commandments of God is to live righteous before Messiah, who offers righteousness to everyone who trusts. Okay. Now, He gives us righteousness to everyone who trusts? Because of Isaiah 53:10. We look upon the sacrifice of Yeshua and we say to God, I want that to count for me, and He makes it count for you. Okay? So we are given a position of righteousness to everyone who trusts. What is the goal at the commandments of God? Is to be Christ-like. Okay? If you want to say that you can be Christ-like without following the commands of God, you give the implication that Messiah himself did not keep the commandments, because if you want to be Christ-like and disobey God's commandments, then you're saying that your goal, your aim, is also not fulfilling the commandments or living the commandments. Okay? So, again and again and again, I'm sorry if I keep repeating this, but it's that critical. We need to win these arguments. We need to know how to win these arguments. Okay. Also quoted Jeremiah 31. Some difference in the English versus Hebrew numbering system. That's okay. For this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, says Adonai, I will put my Torah within them and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will any of them teach his fellow community member or his brother, know Adonai, for all will know me, from the least of them to the greatest, because I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sins no more. Okay, so why do I add this in here? Because the overarching discussion and argument in Galatians is about that the Gentile has a place within the community of Israel as a Gentile. Okay, and so those of us who are Gentiles are considered part of Israel. We don't become ethnically Jewish, but we do become part of Israel. And it's incumbent upon us, just like if we become a naturalized citizen, if you come to the United States, you're expected to learn English and learn the laws of the United States, to live by them, and to swear allegiance to the United States. Okay, if we were to move to France, it'd be incumbent upon us to, learn French, to learn the history and culture. And if you learn to love France that much, you can become a citizen. Actually, you can probably become a dual citizen. But the same thing with the family of God, the community of God, the polity of God, is that we are grafted into the olive tree of Israel, okay, as a wild branch, Gentiles are, okay, and thus you are to act like a citizen, one who has become a citizen um, uh, through the naturalization process, okay, like people who become citizens here in this country, okay. You become a citizen of Israel, a member of the household of God, and thus being a part of that polity, you are expected to live by the rules and laws of God's Israel. Okay. Ezekiel 37. Okay. My servant David will be king over them. All of them will have one shepherd. They will live by my rulings and keep and observe my regulations. Okay. It's in the context of Ezekiel 37. You have to back up a few verses. This is the prophecy where God has told Ezekiel to take two sticks, label one Judah, label one Israel, for the two kingdoms, the two countries, the two political entities, enemies at times, entities, and God tells Ezekiel, take these two sticks, label them up, tie them in your hand, and when people ask you, what does this mean? It says these two groups are going to become one sometime in the future. And this is a near future prophecy, because we know not too many years after this, there was a commandment for Israel to return to her homeland, and it was a mixed group of people who came back down, of Israel, people who used to be of Israel and people who used to be of Judah, and they are to be one people. I always find it a little bit odd. There's a doctrine out there called the two-house doctrine, and they keep trying to separate Judah from Israel, those two groups of people, and keep separating them and to make them distinct and separate. And yet, right here in the prophecy, God says the two shall be one, meaning that there's not going to be a distinction any longer between them. And it's important in this context that this includes Gentiles. Gentiles who had no connection to Israel in any way prior to this moment of coming to Messiah, and being filled with the Spirit of God and being born again. Now they are part of Israel. They are, and according to Torah, they are to be treated as one who is native born. So there's no reason within the Messianic community to make a difference between Jew and Gentile, and it's very wrong to do so. Okay, now with somebody who is Jewish and grows up in the community or in the instructions, it's easier for them to settle into a Messianic understanding, just because they have some of the habits necessary to walk in God's commandments. For the Gentiles, a little more difficult. It's not undoable. It's not doable. But it does take a little bit more education, a little bit more time, a little more practice, a little more oopses, a little more misunderstanding, occasional out and out rebellion. I'm sick and tired of this. But eventually you learn, and it's better to walk with God than walk against God. And so it's understood, and and that's understood. Gentiles who come into the congregation to learn, it's expected that they're not going to get it all day one. It's going to be a learning process, and it's one of the great joys I have, is watching someone who comes in knowing nothing about walking in God's ways and learning them, finding joy in walking in God's ways, and finding wholeness and completeness, joy and rest and peace in doing so. Okay, now there is another controversy here, and people often use this as a counter argument in this section of the text of Galatians. Which is why I threw this in here. And the argument is more like what it's trying to say. People are trying to say is, he wiped away the bill of charges against us because of the regulations. It stood as a testimony against us, but he removed it by nailing it to the execution stake. Okay, this is not the whole argument in the text, but basically, what was nailed to the cross? The commandments or a violation of the commandments. Okay, you got to know the word picture that was made there. The bill of charges is a legal phrase that has to do with a ticket, okay, or charges that are against you. You have an indictment or something like that. If you get busted for speeding and the police officer writes you a ticket, okay, that's basically an indictment on a much lesser severity, but it's an indictment. It's a ticket, and on the ticket is a listing of the law that was broken for why you got the ticket, and then with that is an explanation of the details of how you went along to break that law. Okay, this is the same picture of what was nailed to the cross. The commandments of God were not judged by God, but rather our sins against or violations of God's commandments were judged and removed. Do you understand the difference? Again, you need to win that argument. Okay. So he removed the argument against us. Now, if you show up for traffic court and you know you're guilty and you're just hoping the court's going to be lenient on you and you don't have to pay the whole fine that's listed on the ticket, and you're there, the arresting officer's there, but they can't find your docket. Okay, they can't find the statement that the police officer wrote up and filed with the court to explain what law you broke and how you went around breaking it. Well, so what happens with your case if they can't find your docket? Well, it gets thrown out. Why? Because there's no accusation present. And if there's no accusation, then there's no guiltiness. Okay? And the court takes the position that it never happened. You might have been guilty of sin, screaming 95 miles an hour, in a school district, in a school zone. You know you're guilty, but because the court does not have the accusations, which Yeshua removed, he's the one who removed it by putting it on his cross. You're judged as if you've never sinned, and so that's a very momentous statement. So These commandments that God had ordained were appointed by angels. This is a drash, a discussion or amplification, uh, um, a sermon or an explanation, um, which appears in the New Testament but not found in the Tanakh, which is the Old Testament or Bible, or rabbinic writings. So this is a relatively new idea as far as the timing, that the commandments were appointed by angels. It's actually not found in the Scripture, but you have it supported in statements such as Acts 7:53, Galatians 3:19 right here, and Hebrews 2:2. Okay, so this was a known point. It just wasn't a common explanation during the time that the Bible itself was being written down. And this is what it says: Torah was handed to angels, who handed it to Moshe, who delivered it to Israel. God made his covenant himself only to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, so he went through a mediator. According to the post-Old Testament Jewish tradition, the law was given through angels. The mediator was Moses himself. So this is where this statement comes. It was known at the time of the Brit Chadashah, the New Testament, and so it makes its way into the terminology, but it was not a Hebrew biblical Tanakh statement. Okay, kind of interesting. So if somebody tells you that you can't find that in the Old Testament, you'd have to say that's true. It was traditionally understood as a description of how the commandments were given, which was common at the time the New Testament was written, but not part of the Bible itself until then. Okay, so verse 19 again. So then, why the legal part of the Torah? This is a much bigger commentary, Dr. Stern this time. Why was it needed at all if the promise, verse 18, is independent of it? It was added to the promise into the environment of Jewish history in particular and human history in general in order to create transgressions. This, again, I don't like this, the addition of the word create. In order of the presence of transgressions, perhaps, but not to create transgression. I just don't like that. Anyways, let me get off my high horse with that one. Literally because of transgressions. Okay, so Dr. Stern recognizes that it's not literally in the text. Okay, the latter could mean in order to contain and limit transgressions, in order to keep the Jewish people from becoming so intolerably sinful, that they would become unredeemable. Okay, there's a point to that. We are warned against sin as much as we are warned or instructed to do the right thing. Okay, and that's a good statement. The commandments of God go both in those directions. Okay, tell us what's the right thing to do, and then tell us not to do the wrong things. It's not entirely one or the other. Okay. All right. Okay. But instead of this, I think it means, as Shaul explains in Romans. Shul, by the way, is your congregation building. That's a different explanation. If I don't pronounce this correctly, you're thinking that this is the doctrine of the building. Shaul explains in Romans 7 that a key purpose of the commandments was to make Jewish people ever aware of their sin. Not that Jews were more sinful than Gentiles, but that, like Gentiles, Jews too fall short of earning God's praise. Romans 3:23. The Torah creates transgressions by containing commandments which people break. Indeed, which rebellious human nature perversely wants to break. Okay. Again, I'm not comfortable with that, but this is his quotation. I'll let his words stand as they are. But at least in some cases, the guilt they feel causes them to despair of ever earning God's praise by their own works, so that they come to God in all humility to repent, seek His forgiveness, and trust Him. And there's a lot of references to that. Okay, to some degree, this does work. Okay, if we run into things that God says don't do, and we know we're doing them, it should not drive us away from God because there's no way we can live up to His ways, but rather it should drive us towards God by causing us to want to be rid of that behavior. and to show God that we're sorry for that bad behavior. Okay. All right. Until the coming of the seed, Yeshua in verse 16, about whom the promise had been made. From the time of Moshe until the coming of Yeshua, the Torah had this consciousness-raising role. The Torah still exists, is still in force, see 6:2 later on in our letter. And for those who have not yet come to trust in Yeshua, it still has this function. But for those who do trust in Yeshua and are faithful to him, the Torah need no longer serve in this capacity. Shaul explains why in verses 21 to 25, and we'll get to that shortly. Okay? Not today, but next week or 3. Okay. The Torah still exists. Okay. The Torah was handed down to Moshe on Mount Sinai through angels, a point made 3 times in the New Testament, see Acts 7:53, and through a human mediator, Moshe. And an often heard Jewish objection to the New Testament's teaching is that Jews don't need Yeshua because they don't need a mediator between themselves and God. This verse refutes the claim with its reminder that Moshe himself served as such a mediator, as for that matter did the Kohanim. Who taught me how to spell Kohanim? We fixed that on the run. Come on, you can do it. You can do it. Okay, it just chooses right now for my program to lock up a little bit. This does once in a while. It goes on a cycle of wanting to save and suddenly shuts everything down for a bit. Okay, it's Kohanim, not Kohamin. So did I get this yet? No, it's still not wanting to work. Okay. I'll fix that when I get to it. Okay. The Kohanim and the prophets. Okay. Can't believe I left that thing unfixed. That Moshe himself serves as such a mediator, as for that matter did the Kohanim and the prophets. Okay, see, Messianic Jews are Hebrews and other citations there. And this citation from a pseudepigraphic work during there we go. Kohanim. Okay. That's better. Okay. The Kohanim. In this citation, okay, draw near to God, and draw near to God, and the angels that intercedes for you, angel that intercedes for you, for he is a mediator between God and man. Now this is pseudepigrapha, which means it's not part of the Bible, and written. Pseudepigrapha means false name, and so it's written by somebody who claims to be Dan, but we have no idea, and it's done with the sort of intention that people are going to think, oh, this is the Dan of the Bible, one of the tribes, one of the, so the father of one of the tribes. But no, it was 2nd century before the Common Era, so no, not that close to the original Dan. Okay, I think the story of the Torah being delivered by angels was popular legend in Shaul's day. That's my 2 cents on that. It seems to make sense as it pops up 3 times in the Brit Hadashah, but not mentioned in the Tanakh. Okay. Verse 20. Oh, let me stop for a second. If you have any questions, comments, rebukes, please put them in the chat box. Okay, just want to check the chat box and make sure we're okay. Didn't want to miss anybody's commentary. Questions, comments, rebukes, and all the fun stuff. Okay, verse 20, more commentary. It is said that this difficult verse has some 300 different interpretations. Its literal translation, now the mediator is not of one, but God is one. My understanding of it is this. A mediator necessarily mediates between two parties, both of whom desire to affect the final outcome. In this case, Moshe mediated between God and the Israelites because they were afraid to have God speak to them directly, and perhaps they were hoping that through Moshe they could have a hand in shaping the Torah. Also, angels served as mediators, also in verse 19. But God's promises to Avraham, that's the Hebrew version, Avraham were unmediated. Shaul's point seems to be that because the promises of the Torah are unconditional and came directly from God without a mediator, they are superior to the legal portions of the Torah which the legalists seize on. Does it not appear that the phrase God is one has to do with the Shema, which seems irrelevant in context, contrasting in Romans chapter 3, which I quoted here just for clarity? Or is God the God of the Jews only? Isn't he also the God of the Gentiles? Yes, he is indeed the God of the Gentiles, because if you will admit God is one, therefore he considers righteous the circumcised on the grounds of trusting and the uncircumcised through that same trusting. Okay, so the point is, trusting God enough to do what he says and to follow his ways is what matters. Okay. Now, as far as the question of the mediator, having a little experience with mediators, basically what it reads to me, and my take on having some experience with mediators, is what he's saying is God does not mediate for one side only, but God is a party to the mediation. Okay? More from an English point of view, the mediator does not mediate for one, but God is one. Okay, it's one of the God is one of the ones for whom the mediator mediates. Okay, and you can see this because Moshe acted as mediator in several different times in several different places where he goes back and forth between God and Israel. Okay, now here the argument is that Yeshua is the mediator. And the reason we have Moshe as that example is now that we know what a mediator does, because of seeing what Moshe did, now we know what Yeshua did. Okay? Yeshua came and sacrificed himself to take the punishment that was due for us, that he took the punishment. Now he takes that and goes back to God and says, forgive them, because all sins have now been paid. And God says, okay, they're forgiven. So he returns to us, by way of resurrection and giving us of the Spirit. He returns to us and informs us that he has, through his death and resurrection, erased all the sin, all the record of sin that's in heaven. So when we stand before God for our judgment, what's going to happen with our sins? Well, according to this, they don't count. They don't exist. Okay, they're no longer even in heaven. So when we're in our judgment, then the judgment before Messiah for what we have done for him and in his name here on earth, our sins don't exist. Okay, it's only going to be the good stuff. So how do you want a better reward? The more good you do, the greater your reward. The more you obey God here, the better your reward. So if you want to be selfish about it, follow the commandments, and you will have a greater reward in heaven. Okay, we should be doing it just because it pleases God, and that's really the right reason for doing it. But whatever you do, get in the habit. That's Acts 15:21, by the way. Get into a synagogue and learn on Sabbath day the teachings of Moshe. So the idea is go to where God's commandments are taught and learn how to live them. That's what the Jerusalem Council decided is what to do with all these Gentiles who come to faith in Messiah. So, short commentary on 20, but that's what there was. A lot of times I don't quote a lot of commentators that they essentially say the same thing. So I try to pick the one that explains it best. And if I have to, throw in some of my own wisdom or lack thereof. Okay, that's it for our text for today. let me swing back over to our chat box. Okay. Any other questions, comments, or rebukes before we wind down? If you do, go ahead and type in a question, comment, or rebuke. Otherwise, I'm going to start winding this down, and because I've been told that sometimes there's a delay, a longer delay on this chat, or on hearing me, I should say. So I don't want to shut it off immediately. I'm going to basically let it sit for a minute or two before I shut it off completely. And so if you have any questions, comments, or rebukes in the meantime, otherwise, we're here every Wednesday at 6 o'clock right here on this channel, 6 o'clock California time. This is Simchat Yeshua Messianic Fellowship. You can find us at simchatyeshua.org. That's SIMCHATYESHUA, all one word, .org. And we also have a Facebook page simply called Simchat Yeshua. So come take a look, come say hello. If you like what you see in the way of the handouts, you can find them on the website, and you can download them from there. So go have fun. In the meantime, I'll close up, and oh yeah, last YouTuber kind of thing. Don't forget to subscribe, to like, to hit the bell for notifications for when we go live, and tell others. If you like this, tell other people that this is a good thing to listen to. Okay? Well, God bless you. Shalom. And we will see you next Wednesday, right? Same time, same station, right here on the stage. Okay. I'm going to go silent at this point, but I'm going to let the thing run for about a minute or two further, just in case we have a big delay. I don't want to cut off the recording too soon. So, shalom. God bless you. We'll see you later.